Hello, and welcome to Talking Trains. I'm John, along with Murph and our friend Dave.
Adams.
Dave Adams. Thanks for being here, Dave.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And you're going to find out a lot about Dave today because we're talking about narrow gauge, and this is Mr. Narrow Gauge. I remember I was in Chama a few years ago when I was on my epic chasing trains trip with Gary and Alvin, and I was in Chama wandering around the yard, and I come across Dave, and I'm like, Dave, what are you doing here? And do you remember what you said?
I think something about this is narrow gauge. That's why I'm here.
That's exactly what he said. Well, this is narrow gauge, John. And that's all I had to hear. So we'll be talking about narrow gauge today. Before we get started in earnest, I do want to mention very happy birthday to our friend Glenn Sutherland. I'm sure he's 59 again today. So happy birthday, Glenn, if you happen to see this, thinking about you. And yeah, we're going to have fun. There's something else I want to mention, which is the Bay Area Prototype Modelers Meet is coming up on June 27th. I think it's the 27th. And that's always a really good event. Unfortunately, I'll be missing it this year. I have something else to do. I'm going to be helping with a garden scale open house down in Hollister, California. So if you're into the garden scale stuff and you're going to be going to the open houses, be sure to stop in at the San Benito Southern and say hello, because I'll be there running my garden scale, well, F scale climax on the San Benito Southern, helping out the hills at their layout. So, but anyway, that's, like I said, just a couple things to start things off. Is there anything going on with you, Murph, that people need to know about, or any?
Not a lot.
Any new stuff on the layout or anything going on?
Yeah, I started playing around with a mini print shipment that I got, and I was telling John I basically have been using my airbrush to do the priming and also to do zenithal highlighting on them using white inks, and that seems to be working out really good so far. I have a shipment of a new style of contrast paints coming in from Monument Hobbies that I just really wanted to try out and thought this would be a good place to actually do it. So hopefully we'll have some results from that soon.
Oh.
On the flip side, on my layout, I've been working on tunnels and making new 3D prints of tunnel portals in kind of a cast concrete style. And so we'll see how that goes.
Right on. Well, that all sounds really good. I'm trying to think if there's anything else coming up that I forgot, and I don't think there is. So let's talk about Dave. One of my favorite subjects.
Right.
So maybe before we get into the whole presentation about narrow gauge, maybe people need to know a little bit about you. I can say that we met because I think you called me one day or emailed me saying that you'd like to do a layout tour of your layout, which, by the way, I should mention that Dave's layout tour is on this channel. It's the Durlin Branch, Durlin branch of the Rio Grande, right? Proto Lance or Proto Freelance, however you put that. And it's a really, really nice layout. Probably one of the nicer layouts in the entire area here in the Bay Area where we live. And yeah, that was how we met, I guess, was just talking on the phone about that probably almost 10 years ago now.
It was. I got an email from Jack Burgess because you'd done a video of his railroad. And then I guess you asked Jack, who else do you think?
Yes.
And so he sent out emails to several of us other guys in the Bay Area here. And I thought, well, what's to lose? Let me call them up. And as a result is that started a real friendship. So
yeah.
It's just been great.
Yeah, it has been great. And it's funny because every time we get to hang out for any amount of time, right? I end up learning something that I didn't know that you've done something. Because see, what people need to know about you, Dave, is Dave doesn't talk about himself really at all. You know, some people you meet and then I don't want to call it bragging, but they tell you stuff, you know, like, so another Dave's, I got to tell the story because I just think it's one of the funniest stories, another Dave story. And we were talking about this earlier today. so every year, if you watch this channel, you know that I go to something called Reedley Rail Fest. And it's a gathering of guys and gals that do 15-inch, mostly live steam. They have a couple of diesels, but they almost never run them for the Rail Fest out in Reedley, California. And so it's really people from all over the place. I mean, there are people who work on much bigger operations who got their start in grand scale, right? That's what that's called. What is it? 5-inch gauge?
5 inches of the foot.
Or 5-inch
inch
scale.
gauge, right.
Right. 15-inch gauge. Anyway, so all these people gather, and it's a really interesting event, and it's a great place to see a lot of interesting equipment because it's scaled down real steam, right? And I was out there, I don't know, 6 or 8 years ago. I think it was like the first or second time I had gone to this event. And one of the people that works or lives on the farm there where it's held mentioned something about a caboose that went by that was built by Dave Adams. And I thought, oh, I know a guy named Dave Adams. I wonder if it's the same guy, but I thought it can't possibly be the same guy because, you know, Dave Adams, it's a pretty common name, right?
Yep.
And so I said, oh, I know a guy named Dave Adams. And she says, oh yeah, he's from the Bay Area. And I, well, wait a minute. The Dave Adams I know is from the Bay Area. I had no idea that this Dave Adams would have built a caboose. So I called up Dave's house because I have it on my phone, right? And Dave's wife answered, and I said, Carla, I'm at this railroad thing. She says, yeah, I'm not surprised, or something like that. And I said, someone here is telling me that Dave Adams built a caboose. Do you know anything about that? And she told me that thing was in my garage for 6 months. I couldn't park my car in the garage. So I'm like, what? Dave built a caboose? Like, I'd never heard anything about this before. So Carla said, if you'll know that it's the caboose because I did a needle point for it and we put it inside the caboose. And sure enough, the caboose came back around and I looked in and there's a needle point there. And I'm like, what?
Yep.
So Dave, today you're going to have to talk about yourself because we're talking about narrow gauge and your sort of your journey into and through narrow gauge. So I'm looking forward to this. I'm going to learn something else today.
Well, probably. We'll see, John. Yeah,
Right.
You'll forget it though, so that's all right.
Oh, I will.
Yeah.
I will. Yeah. But the real question is if it will be embarrassing or not. So I'm hoping for the embarrassing stuff to come out.
Oh yeah, that'll happen. That'll happen, guaranteed.
Yeah. So that's my two favorite Dave Adams stories. But you can tell people a little bit about yourself, and we can bring the presentation whenever you're ready.
Okay.
So you just tell me when you're ready, and I'll bring it up. But otherwise,
well, let's go ahead and bring up the presentation, and I'll tell a little, because I'll use that to kind of introduce maybe who I am. So,
well, here we go.
Yeah. So this is the title slide. That was taken by a really good friend of mine that passed away about a decade ago. This is the Rio Grande. This is up on Cumbres, and this was a meet between an excursion train that the Rocky Mountain Railroad Club was running at the time and a freight. And I was very fortunate in having been a friend of this gentleman for 30 some odd years. And he taught me more about steam railroading or he forgot more about steam railroading than I'll ever know. But he's just a huge influence on me and a lot of my modeling. So we'll go ahead and we'll just reach over here and grab this little button.
Wait, what was his name?
That was Jim Holmes.
Jim Holmes.
Yeah,
okay,
Jim
yeah, I've heard
Holmes
that
name.
name.
We'll get into a little bit more about Jim a little later on. So I titled this thing "Why Narrow Gauge," or "Why Not Narrow Gauge." So what really attracted me, I've been a standard gauge modeler growing up. I guess parents said I was trying to play trains ever since I was big enough to push wooden trains around on the floor at home. So that was it. And then went into HO and was freelancing in there. Belonged to a club in Corvallis, Oregon, where I met a lot of people that taught me a lot more about the hobby. And moving down to California to get a job, that's really where I got kind of hooked on narrow gauge. And there are a couple of things that really spoke to me about it. One of them was the man-to-machine ratio. And the two pictures of the two hogheads and the cabs up there, I think kind of illustrate that. I mean, they look pretty big compared to the cab. You compare that to something like the 4014 and, where you got little bitty people in this monster machine up there. I just like the ratio of man to machine here. The other thing is most of these railroads, whether they were industrial or anything else, they went through some pretty spectacular scenery. Even desert hard rock mining scenery is pretty spectacular. They were all interesting operations. I mean, that was the other thing. It was certainly not big time railroading, but it was just fascinating what they did. The equipment, it was just neat. Yeah, I just fell in love with the stuff. They had cool facilities, and they had generally fascinating histories. And so that's really kind of what piqued my interest in the narrow gauge.
Yeah, what's not to like?
Yeah, that was it, and it was different than what everybody else was doing. Just to admit that there's more than just Colorado, which is what really got me going. Is here we've got the little West Side Lumber Company up in the left-hand corner, and we got SP Narrow Gauge shoving guns up on the transfer trestle there, the Winyo. On the right is more recent. That's Nevada County Narrow Gauge number 5 with the Carson and Colorado steam up a year or two ago. The left is back to the SP Narrow Gauge. And that's a man-to-machine thing. You're out there in 110-degree temperature, and there's a crew out there changing out journals in a truck that needed to be changed out. And the guys that weren't working spent all the time they could in the shade. I mean, it was just miserable out there. And again, that's another Jim Holmes photo. And then the photo in the middle is a little closer to home. So that's the depot that used to be at Los Gatos. And if you notice the 3 rail in front, well, this was a time when the South Pacific Coast was still running, and the SP was they owned them at that time, and was also trying to figure out how to standard gauge the line up and over. They didn't get that done until after the 1906 earthquake, but it remained 3-foot gauge after the earthquake because they could get that going again faster than they could do the conversion. And then on the right is a locomotive that stole my heart. That's Dan Markoff's 440, the Eureka. And if you haven't ever seen that in person or seen it run, if you do, you immediately fall in love. It is such a jewel. And that really shows kind of a man-to-machine relationship.
Where is that locomotive?
So that locomotive, Dan Markoff rescued that by buying it from a movie set outside of Reno. It was in a fire, and he thought, man, I used to play on that when I was a kid. I can't let it go to waste. So he ended up buying it. He basically told the city council he was going to build an RV barn in his backyard in Las Vegas. You know, big RV, double RV barn. He says, if I would have told them I was building a locomotive engine house, they would have never approved the permit. But everybody's got RVs in this part of the country, so that was easy. So he did that. He spent years rebuilding this thing, taking it back to blueprint, researching the original colors. He fabricated an awful lot of things that was missing on that locomotive. He turned himself into a tinsmith, a welder, and he got a really good group of other craftsmen surrounding him to do this. And he takes that out and tours it. It's run all over California. It's run on just about every railroad in Colorado, this 3-foot gauge. Wow. And he has been at the rail fairs in Sacramento on that. And Dan is just a fascinating guy. He was also an attorney. Mm-hmm. And so he said the time machine, he says, it's allowed me to meet astronauts, presidents, and everything else, because when people learn about this, they want to come out and visit and see it. So he says, I've had all kinds of people that I have no business associated with because of this locomotive.
That is great.
It was just just typical of the narrow gauge mystique and picture on that. So
yeah, there's a video on this channel that's worth mentioning that was from the Victorian Iron Horse Roundup, where I saw you in Chamba that time that I recalled the story a minute ago. And it has a bunch of really spectacular footage of these kind of engines running, but the Eureka was there. And I think the shots I got with it was double-headed with the Glenbrook.
It was.
Which was a really cool power lash up, to see these two really antiques, right? Running together. Yeah. So people can find that. I don't remember what I called it. I think it's narrow gauge in Colorado or something like that. But it's or maybe it was a Victorian Iron Horse Roundup in Colorado. I don't remember, but it was a really cool video. Yeah. Fun to shoot.
Yeah. What was the movie that the engine was in?
It was in Ken Burns' documentary on Settling the West.
Okay.
They used it on that, and they shot it on the Durango and Silverton Railroad when they did that. And yeah, so he just said, is there's a big difference. Yeah, talking to Dan, he said there's a huge difference between working with the usual guys in Hollywood and working with Ken Burns. Ken Burns understands artifacts, antiques, and real history. The guys in Hollywood are in it for the grease paint and the whatever it is. And he says, I don't ever want to work with the guys in Hollywood, but I'll work with Ken Burns every time.
Awesome.
All right.
Okay, let's move here. So one of the other things about narrow gauge is the stories. Now, these are just a couple of books that I really like. They aren't history books per se, but they're stories of people's lives on the railroad. The one on the left was by Gil Lathrop. He was not the author of the book. He just transcribed what his father, Carl, and his uncles told him about early day of railroading in Colorado on the narrow gauges, and in the case of the Colorado Midland on the standard gauge. And it's just fascinating reading. The book where you can't read the title, that's on the Rio Grande Southern, and that was written by Josie Moore Crum. Her husband was, forget his first name, I'm sorry, but these are the stories that she remembered being told by him. He was a conductor on the RGS for his entire life and retired from that railroad. Actually, he ended up moving out west and were part of the guys that brought things to life at Knott's Berry Farm. And so that's a book. I mean, it's got chapters in there called The Worst Day Ever on the Railroad. It's got, trouble at whatever it is. And there's also some history in there, but it was published in 1954. And I think it's just a great book. The next book with a color photograph on the cover is Rio Grande Glory Days, and that's another Gil Lathrop book. And these are his stories of working on the narrow gauge railroad on that. And as real historians say, well, a lot of this stuff is fabrication. And the answer is, yeah, it may be, because railroaders tell stories. And as my good friend Dave Clune once told me, he says, boy, a good railroader never lets the truth get in the way of a good story. So, you take this with a grain of salt. But in all of these stories, there's enough of the truth about what life and times were to make it all worthwhile. And then same thing with Western Yesterday's book on the South Park Railroaders that Forrest Crossan put together after interviewing a lot of the guys that ran out of Como, Breckenridge, and places like this. I mean, these were tough folks. And the big book in the left-hand corner with a big standard gauge steam engine on it, it was written by Margaret Cole, with the stories told by her grandfather, Sam Spays, who again grew up running on the narrow gauge on the Denver, Leadville, and Gunnison, where it was the Colorado Southern on the Colorado Southern. He worked all over the system, including out of Como, and his descriptions of what life was like in Como in the winter, man, these guys were tough men. I mean, that's all there was to it. And that's also a good read. He ended up retiring, running big mainline diesels and things of this sort, which he said weren't half as much fun as the steam. But he was a railroader to the end. So that's kind of why I was fascinated in. Whoops!
Why is
we got here?
Why is it doing that?
Probably need to put focus back.
Let's try this.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Here we go. So this is a picture that I took on my first trip on my honeymoon to Colorado in 1976. So, my wife is really long suffering. So the neat thing about this is pretty much as the two states inherited the railroad. What you see out there is one of their K-36s at the time. You see a little teapot over there. That was a locomotive that a gentleman named Keller had. He was trying to run a railroad up out of near Lake Tahoe.
Oh, I've heard about that.
That was an engine he got from Hawaii, and they refurbished it, and they laid track, and they made a go of it for about a year until it financially was a disaster. But the neat thing about the picture here is this is the way Chama was. The only thing that's missing is a warehouse that existed where you see all the barricades in the front and the cinders there. That was a wool warehouse that the railroad, Cumbers, and Toltec tore down to provide parking space for people that wanted to ride the train.
I was going to say that's the way it is now too, pretty much.
Well, actually, it's a little different.
There's a little bit more, but
yeah, what you see now are flying buttresses on both ends of the brick structure. You see the big modern engine house coming out behind it. It's so Chama has changed a lot over the years. So we're going to take a look at some pictures before they had the money to start really changing things. Okay, this is another picture of what they inherited. It turns out the Chama water tank at that time was so old and beat up and dried out that it wouldn't hold a drop of water. It just leaked like a sieve. So the railroader's solution was, well, heck, let's take one of the auxiliary water cars off the rotary snowplow train. We'll shove it up on the service track here for the sand bin and the coaling tower, and we'll just put up a makeshift water spout behind it. And so that serviced water for quite a bit of time until they could basically rebuild the Chama tank so it held water, and then put that back into service. This is another picture you can't see anymore because that structure basically fell down. That was part of the, well, snow sheds fell down a lot. That was part of the original snow shed, and that was what was inherited by the Cumbers and Toltec. The snow shed covered one leg of the Y, quite a bit of the distance on the tail of the Y, and a short distance along the other leg of the Y. What's up there now just covers, kind of a switch and a little bit, and that was all reconstructed. It's not part of the original at all, but it was reconstructed after this thing essentially fell down because of the severity of the weathers. The two bump outs on the side, interestingly enough, those were coal sheds, and they basically held coal for recoaling locomotives by hand. And we're talking about a shovel here. So you shoveled coal out of gondola cars onto the platforms and off the platforms into tenders. Primarily, it was for recoaling the rotary snowplow and things of this sort when they had that. The original snow shed didn't have the two bump outs. What was there? It was circular, and it had a turntable in this end of the snow shed. So you could use the Y to turn, or you could turn small locomotives on this little wooden turntable in there. So just like I said, fascinating history and facilities. This is the what's currently up there at the Cumbers. This again was 1976, and at that time there was a caretaker living in that building, and he was living there, and he would take care of the trains coming through every day. And in between that, he spent all his time trying to repair and put together this structure to keep it from falling down, which he did. I'm standing up on a hillside which had the water cistern, and that's what provided the water plug that you see there in the foreground. And the coal shed over on the left is looking at historic pictures over time of this area up there. That coal shed has moved all over the property up there. I don't know how they did it, but it was there, and at this time it ended up there, and that's pretty much where it is now.
It's funny how stark the station is in here with the rest of the setting. You're like, you really ought to weather things before you put them on the lab.
I was going to say that. It looks like a model picture, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's, and there's a gentleman that was a caretaker down there bending over. What he was making were cripples on the bottom of the posts supporting the porch because they'd all rotted out because of the snow stacked up there and things of this sort. So he was taking care of that. This is going into Toltec Gorge and the Toltec Tunnel just ahead. So this is a picture of the original rider cars on that railroad, which were 3000 series box cars that they simply cut down the upper half of. They left all the bracing and the truss rods in there to keep the car together. And then they put in big plexiglass windows that just drop down in between the inside, the grain boards on the inside and the sheathing on the outside. And when it rained out, as you pulled this thing out of there and you took a couple of hooks up over some eyelets at the top rail on the car, and that kind of kept out that. They were not heated, they were not lighted. They had plastic seats in them, and they rode like a freight car. So yeah, it was an experience. On the right hand side, you can see just barely by the trees there, the Garfield Monument, just poking out from the trees there. And that was put up in honor of James Garfield. And that happened because at the time, the American Passenger Railway Ticket Agency Association was having some sort of a big tour of the West and things on that. And then they got word that their president had been assassinated. So they decided, what better place to erect a monument to our fallen leader than here? Because you've got a gorge that's 800 feet down from here it's pretty spectacular.
Yeah.
That and running into the tunnel. This is another location on the line, still 1976. And there's a lot of erosion has taken place, so this isn't quite like what it was. But this is heading into a place called Phantom Curve. And Phantom Curve was so named because of the way the wind and weather and storms and everything wore away the rock formations. And you were left with, I'm going to say, just nothing but a whole bunch of phallic symbols sticking up out of the earth. And it was called Phantom Curve because at night the headlights would play on this stuff. Oh. And it looked like who's and whatever it is as you went through this area. Now we're changing venues. We're now on the Rio Grande Southern, and we're in Rico. And what we're looking at here is an inspection pit in the what's left of the Rico engine house. Still spiked a gauge in there. And I, of course, got the tools out of my old Volkswagen and pried up a spike. So I've got spike out of the Rico engine house at home in my collection of stuff. But this has all been since scraped dead. It's completely obliterated by bulldozers and everything on that, as well as the 2 boxcars that were accident and some other kind of neat things that were still remnants. A number of years, because Rio Grande Southern shut down in 1951, and so this was 76. So this was only what is it, 50 years later or so on that. I can't do mental math anymore. And this was not the Durango and Silverton, but this is in Durango, and this was the Rio Grande. I mean, still it was the Rio Grande. They were running it. Cool part about it was there was no McDonald's, no fences, no guards. And if you minded your business, you had the run of the place. You could go in the engine house, you could wander through things. I mean, I was like a kid in a candy store. Oh, yeah. My wife wasn't so thrilled because, it's a greasy old dirty train yard. I mean, right. What's about that? But it was just a wonderful experience. And this is the trip we took. We're in here, we're headed up around the High Line. There you can see that. It no longer looks like that. It looks like much more modern reinforcement. And the reason was, in later years, all of this started to landslip. Right. So that's been reinforced and fixed and everything else.
A way of mountains.
Absolutely. On this trip, the seats that Carl and I had in the car were in a car full of senior citizens. So on the trip up, we got to listen to senior citizens singing every railroad song they knew. Oh, yeah. Which was, yeah. When you're in your 20s or whatever it is, this is a different experience. But it was fun. We also learned the lesson is extra fare cars are the way to go on these things. Here's what Silverton looked like. This track into town, it came, out of the screen toward us, swung around to the right, and ended up just outside of Blair Street. And that's where he trained, went downtown, got lunch, went trinket shopping. So, yes. I wish I knew then what I know now about the area and the history. So the buildings you see in the background are all gone. They've been leveled and torn down. Those are original buildings, gantry crane, miners, and things. The concrete strip on the left is, what was that? Well, it turns out that was a cement wall for a scale up there for weighing concentrate going out of the mines and mills up there. Okay. And that was all Rio Grande, when all the mining and everything pretty much folded up, it was relegated to trucks, is they just filled all that in. They tore up the scale tracks and everything else. There used to be a pretty interesting yard up there in the early days. So this is still narrow gauge, but we were talking about the 5-inch scale, 15-inch gauge stuff. And this is a photo I took when I was running the 5 up there, which you can see there. And we had to go on the hole at Uke Siding and wait for the inbound passenger train headed for Army camp. And this stuff was just so neat to run. I mean, and the engines are built such you can have engineers sitting on the tender on the right side, firemen on the left side, and 2 butts, in the cab. You're looking at it up over there. And when you're working up grade, these things, they just sound marvelous. It's pound away. It's just, again, part of the narrow gauge mystique. It's a proportion of man and machine, and they're just neat things.
Right. That number 5 is still up at Redwood Valley. I just saw it. when I was up there. I think.
There's a 5. That's a different 5.
Oh, that's their 5.
Yeah, this is the 5 that you see down at
Wrigley. Yeah,
Absolutely.
they had this 5 visiting
Yes.
at Redwood Valley a
Yes.
couple weeks ago,
Yeah.
and it was double heading with their 5, and
yeah.
they called it the 55.
Yeah. Yeah. So the Redwood Valley 5 is a 440.
Yeah,
It was one of the last, next to the last engines that Eric turned out before he died up there. So this is a back prototype. Railroad is at work. On the left is a guy that was basically uncoupling. This particular log car had a problem, so they weren't even going to take it down and try and dump it into the mill pond. That was going to be a problem. So they just kind of did a flying switch of sorts into the car shop. So that's what's going on here. The guy's riding that. That's it. The car's rolling away. Then the picture on the right side is fireman on the Cummins and Toltec on the tender deck, putting what all steam engines need, more water. So that was it. Just I didn't take enough pictures of railroader doing railroad things. There's a whole lot of things I regret about not doing, and I didn't take enough pictures of people over the years. So
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah,
yeah.
it is.
The most fascinating pictures have people in them.
Yeah,
Always.
absolutely. So this is a picture on the left I took during the 315's 10th anniversary, I think, run after getting back into there. My friend of mine and I, we said, yeah, we're going to go back and we're going to ride this excursion. And so we did that. The picture on the right is off of my railroad, which obviously it's not the 315, it's a couple of T12s. But I thought, well, that's close enough for what we were trying to do here. Sometimes you can sort of come close to recreating history, even if it's modern day history.
Yep.
So
especially with the water tank right there too. That's really nice.
Yeah, the water tank. That's scratch built. That's board by board, including the tank stays, the shingles, and everything else. Oh, and the spout works, and it's got sound for a water fill. Cool. So it was just on my railroad. I do things like that to make the run more interesting and make it a little bit longer. So we try and provide play value, if you will. So now we're going to get into a bunch of pictures of modeling that's by other people in the narrow gauge area. And these I've all stolen from a program that several of us put on once a month called Off the Beaten Track. We do it for what we call wayward narrow gaugers in between national narrow gauge conventions to try and keep their enthusiasm up for the subject.
As if you need to.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And we've got a loyal following that dials in lives, usually less than 100 people. And then we've got several thousand people that look at the material on YouTube after we get it edited and posted back up there from the live recording. So these are pictures before the show goes live. We run a pre-show slideshow with modeling that members have sent in of the group. And so they're from all over the place. This is a photo of Keith Stamper up in Port Colborne. That's near Toronto area up there. And he's just a fantastic modeler and just a good friend of mine and a wonderful guy. I've known him for years. Here's a picture from Steve Bradley down Southern California, HON3. He likes the SP narrow gauge. So that's what he's models. And he does a great job of it. He's got photo background in there and just blends in perfectly with his scenery. It's a picture of another friend of mine, Jim Chiddix, who's got a place in Evergreen, Colorado. And he's modeling the Oahu Railroad in ON3. And it's a mushroom design layout. And he goes from the port here at Honolulu, on the passenger station up there, and he's got this modeled. He's got automated staging yard and everything else, so he can run all of the passenger trains. They had a double track main line out of this station here on that, and they ran commutes, they ran freights, they ran all kinds of stuff, and they also had an automatic block system, signaling system. There was timetable and train order operation, but you had ABS to protect what was going out on the line. And just so Jim has got a cohort of folks, and they're working like crazy at that. And I'm happy to say that Jim is part of my operating group. He splits his time between Evergreen and out here on the West Coast. And so he gets up for operating sessions on that. So this is a little bit more of Jim, and this is part of the extreme to which narrow gaugers go. He needed sugar. These are sugar cane cars. And so he researched these things. He found another guy that wanted to was willing to do CAD work and 3D printing for him. So he did that. And we've looked at all kinds of prototypes and things until he finally hit on it, how to do this. And then, so once the 3D printing was all done and that all seemed to work out, then Jim had to figure out how he was going to do those chains and get the parabola that hung on that thing to do it. And I have no idea how Jim did it, but he's got the patience of a saint to do that. It was just amazing modeling. I've seen those things in real life.
Well, it's fascinating seeing the empties with detritus left in them.
Yeah, then you got the cane loads, and that looks like the pictures you see on those railroads over there. Just everything just loaded up to the ceiling as high as you could get it, sticking out in all directions. On the left, in the upper left-hand corner, those are pineapple cars.
Oh.
And those were the uppers. The flat cars were all basically built on Bachmann cars. The uppers are all laser cut sides and things. And then what was also laser cut and assembled were pineapple boxes, thousands of pineapple boxes, and they contain O-scale pineapples. No, these are all 3D printed. A good friend of mine, Jonathan Sawyer, worked with that, and he printed up, I don't know how many millions of these things, and he had them on plates. I mean, just a whole, he told Jim, he says, Jim, you get to paint them and cut them off. I'm not having anything to do with that. But they're just cool. So this is another gentleman up in Canada, and he takes a fascination for railroads and things outside of the United States. And so this is a 1/32 scale where he did a bunch more detailing on it of a little bitty gadget that ran, it looks like in bolt of grease, it says, that, on some sort of a brickworks or something down there. But, the narrow gauge community runs from everything from just little bitty teapots to who's the big stuff to Sumter Valley size engines. Just neat.
Wow.
Another building here. This is large scale, so this is going to be FN3 on that, and they just did a marvelous job. You can read all the labels on those containers that are in there on that. The Barron Oil Supply Company, and it just got the top of the window open up there. Just cool stuff. Yeah, this is Pete Smith. He's one of the guys that does this, and he's the guy now that puts together these slideshows. I don't. So, yeah. When I had my small stay in the hospital, it took me out of action for a while. I relinquished that job with Pete, and he's done a great job with it. But this is on Pete's layout, and I just thought it was neat because it's kind of desolate. He's got a cattle guard there. He's got a stock car parked over in the background. He's got a guy on a horse coming through here over there and down that path. And this is just kind of emblematic of what narrow gauge modelers do and what they're interested in.
Right.
And as he said, he got inspired because a gentleman did Craig Wright that did a fantastic.
Oh, he's in the Pacific Northwest, isn't he? Craig Wright, isn't he?
He's in Colorado.
Oh, okay.
I think out there, and he's got a fantastic railroad, and it's put up so photographically that you have these deep scenic vistas and things of this sort. It's on our YouTube channel, but it was it. Anyway, Pete was so impressed at looking at some of the stuff that Craig had built on his railroad. He says, man, I got to have this. So he went out and promptly built that. Now this, again, closer to home. This is California. This is a photo I took, and it's on a 2-foot gauge railroad at Norgrove Garden Vineyards. Peter Dott, the CEO of that, down south, out not too far out of San Luis Obispo. And so what he's doing is he's built a railroad around a winery he's building and putting in production on that. And they were open for Pacific Coast layout tours last year when they had the PCR in San Luis Obispo. And anytime somebody's got steam to show, I show up. That's just part of, I like steam. So this was it. This is a U.S. Army trench engine from World War I. There aren't many of these things left. The reason this thing is left is it didn't get finished until the armistice was signed. So there was no point in sending it over to fight in the war because the war was over. And so he got a hold of this, and he employs a full-time shop crew to rebuild these things. I don't have pictures, but you can see behind it other locomotives. His engine house is full of mostly European locomotives, 2-foot gauge to run this, impeccably restored, just absolutely gorgeous pieces of machinery. Just fascinating place.
What's also amazing about that shop is it is so clean.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, I don't remember the name of the video. I think it's on the Great Railroads of the Central Coast or something like that.
Yeah, it is.
That we did a segment on this railroad, and you can see, because I put the camera down near the floor on one shot, and you can see in the engine house that the floor is shiny.
Yeah,
like you could eat off the floor in this place. And so that's another video worth checking out on this channel if you have a chance. I think it's Great Railroads. Does that sound right?
It does. Of Central Coast. Yeah, that was it. That was, I think, it was done as part of a promo for the PCR convention down there that you guys did.
Yeah, it might be Great Central Coast Railroads, whatever.
So here we're going to jump back east. This is Joe Fuss. Joe Fuss ran for a long time a laser kit company called Rags to Riches. And so if you needed RGS buildings in any scale, as Joe probably had produced them. And he's also a fantastic modeler in his own right. He basically closed down the business when his wife came down with cancer, and he said, I've got to do some other things. And he said, that, and I want to build my railroad. So he's got a bunch of guys working on this. But yeah, I like his comment at the end. This is a bridge 45A on the RGS, backdated to when they had the house truss in the middle of it. And I like his comment. He says, hey, trestles can get boring. So we're going to build the version that's got the house truss in the middle of it.
It's a pretty amazing structure.
Yeah, and these probably ought to recognize this. This is down the Pacific Coast. Yeah, down there. And
ridden in that one, actually.
Yeah, same here. So they were open for the PCR as well. So went out there and so Jeff Badger said, Dave, come on out here, and I had something to deliver to him anyway. So I did that, and I got there, and Jeff said, come over here, Dave, climb up in there. So that's a great railroad.
It is.
And that engine really works going up some of those grades out there. It's just, it's a pretty darn cool.
Those little engines make some really good noise going up that little grade they have.
They do.
And that's one of those places. As a matter of fact, they just had something recently called Best of the West. I don't know.
Yeah.
Did you go this year?
I didn't. No.
Yeah, that was within the past month or so. I think it was Memorial Day weekend, and that's a really great opportunity for people to get out to the Santa Margarita Ranch and see this place. Now, sorry, go ahead. Yeah,
this is just another picture of that same engine with the fireman in here smoking it up because people had cameras out.
Yeah.
Normally guys firing oil burners, you're running with a light haze. The only time it smokes up is when you're standing on the flues and you're getting all the crud out of the flues coming up there. But
or if you have a bad fireman.
Bad fireman will do it. And you can see that. And the other neat thing about it is that coach back there is one of Walt Disney's original.
The Santa Fe Pacific.
Known as the Retlaw coaches. Retlaw is Walter spelled backwards.
Okay.
And because he owned all the equipment on the Disneyland Railroad.
Oh,
the park didn't own that stuff.
I didn't know that.
Disney did. Yeah, that's so this is we're going back up to Canada, and Jeff Millman up there is he's outside of Toronto, and he's just a tremendous guy. He builds in brass, he builds just about any medium you want to talk about. And so he's building two layouts in his one of them is standard gauge, and I forget what that is. For some reason, I think it's one of the main Boston, Maine, or something of this sort. And the other is the Denver Rio Grande Western, the west side of Cumbers. And so he's got this thing wired up. So we'll go through some shots of this. And the reason I'm dwelling on this is because I love Chama. I'm just partial to that area. I'm certainly biased there. So this is a view looking at that. What he's got coming into town here behind K28 is one of his San Juans. He's got two of those, so he can run both east and west versions of this thing. Chama Depot on the right, he scratch built that. Here's the why. He had the same problem I did. You really can't get it headed in the right direction when you're going around the curve this way for your main line. So you fake it and you move the stock pins over to the other side where they really weren't. But that's a small problem. But I love this shot because this is the oil house here. So the left side of the building where you see the iron shutter over there, and the door in there, that's an iron door, that contained all the engine lubricants, the kerosene oil for the lamps, and every other thing like that. And it was built brick. It had shutters on all the doors and windows, and there was a huge brick wall between that and the office part of the building, which was at the further end. And the reason for that is if you had a fire, you wanted to be able to contain it in here. And the roof on that building is also concrete.
Oh,
So they were just really serious about that. It's it. So I've now Jeff was smarter than I did. He looked at more historical photos when he built this. So he's got the windows right for his area in there. When I measured up the structure in real life and down there and drew it, I made the mistake of not consulting historic photos. So I drew the modern windows they have in there now. And that's the way I built mine.
oh,
But it's done, and I'm not going to go back and change it at this point. That's too much work.
So in one of the previous photos, actually even here, the ties look like they're a lot wider than needed for the rails. Not the same proportion.
No, yeah.
Is that common?
Well, there were, if you look at narrow gauge ties, Russ Simpson years ago did a study of ties on various narrow gauge railroads and wrote up a whole article in Short Line and Narrow Gauge and Short Line Gazette. And yeah, tie widths and depths varied all over the place depending on the railroad and what they wanted to do. So yeah, I'm not sure what data Jeff was working from. I worked from it that wasn't that important. What was important that I could get a whole lot of capillary ties.
Okay.
Cut the size,
Right.
on that. And the spacing is, I made jigs and put those down and just, yeah, that looks good. The way we went. So that was going on there. Yeah, there's tail end of the San Juan headed toward the east end of Chalma there with the cooling tower and everything on the way up toward Columbus. So we're going to go back to the Midwest here. Richard Rams, he runs Berkshire Valley, which is a model kit company. They do period wagons, cars, structures, and things of this sort here. And he's an ON30 modeler. He models what he calls the Mineral and South Fork Railway. And he likes structures and he likes bridges. And he's just a marvelous modeler.
Oh, wow.
You can see in here is, that's up there, ON30 locomotive going across that huge bridge. There's bridges down there. You can see the culvert he's got running along the bottom. He's got it's just, this whole area that's seen. You walk into this on that. It's floor to ceiling kind of scenery on that. He was open for the St. Louis convention last year. Then there's another picture off of his. And those are two of the Bachmann 2442s that he's got double headed on there with a short train. I don't know how they make any money on that railroad, but it sure is cool.
that's what matters.
Yeah, that's what matters. Yeah. Yeah, scenically, it's just a gem.
That's amazing.
The flume is pretty cool too.
Yeah, it is.
Let's just be honest
Yeah,
here.
it is. Yeah, that's. So this is another guy back on the East Coast who is enamored with the Rio Grande 3rd Division, which is the one that went up over Marshall Pass. And so he's modeled as much of that as he can in a 3-car garage and just helix and hooses and just around the room multiple times, climbs and peninsulas or whatever. So this is a shot here of his engine house with one of his engines. Yeah, he's a big engine fan, whereas I'm kind of a small engine fan. And he's got this, but the thing that blew me away was this next picture. I mean, this is the interior of an engine house.
Yes.
On that. It looks dark, it looks dank, it's whatever it is, it's just beautiful. With one of his big K's sitting there. It's just super. Yeah, and the other thing that's interesting is you start looking at interior of engine house pictures. And when I was building my Chama roundhouse, the question was, what did you do? Well, so usually around the bottom of it, it was painted a darker, just left a brick color. Above a certain, usually at window height, it was whitewashed the rest of the way up because these places were dark. And so you were trying to get as much reflective surface in as you could. The funny thing was when you started looking to the posts that were holding up a lot of the structure here is depending on which house, and even on the Rio Grande, it was different. Sometimes they painted the upper stories white and the bottom was dark, and other times the bottoms were white and the upper stories were left dark. You know, go figure. I guess it must have been up to the local B&B gang of whoever was maintaining to do it. Another picture, this is more Rio Grande Southern. This is Bill Basaka up in Shelton, Washington. And he's a heck of a modeler. He was a dentist, so he's used to doing really precise work, and his railroad is just really neat. Yeah, he says, well, yeah, the Dolores Depot is on the left, and he basically says, yeah, this is accurately modeled. He says, he started with a kit, but all the changes that were made are on the backside where you can't see it, because that's the backdrop there. You can only see this scene from one side. So yeah, this is all the Bill's work. So this is Lynn Wickersham out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. He's their scratch builder, and the work is just absolutely fantastic. So he took fancy to this mine, and he started building this. That stonework is all individually stacked pieces of rock. I mean, he goes to these lengths. You just, wood and everything is all pre-stressed and weathered and put in there. This is, part of the roof off in the structure here, where you can see the winch in the background, steam engine and things in the front. It's just fantastic modeling. And this picture strikes me in particular. Here you got a bit of the board floor. You can see the walls with the deterioration going on. You see part of a wire spool there on the right, other things. But then you look at the bucket. It's got a shovel sticking out of it. The rust and everything on the inside is just impeccable. I'm sorry it just doesn't show up in these things. I read his photo. It's just fantastic stuff. And yeah, he found this was off of the Gilpin Tram, which is a 2-foot gauge railroad in Colorado. Back to the RGS here, John Kalin out of St. Louis modeled the Rio Grande Southern. And I've been able to see his railroad a few times, and it's scenically, it's spectacular. The track design was, boy, you could operate this railroad. The funny thing is, Pete Smith, as part of his group, is they get together and they have such a good time hoisting highballs, telling stories and things. They never get around to operating. If anything, they'll run a train or two just to watch it go through the scenery. But yeah, they admit this, well, no, they're more highballers than they are operators. So, this railroad that was built to operate just really never has.
Well, but that goes, though, to show. It goes to the whole idea that your op sessions are a chance to, or excuse to hang out anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, Tom Sullivan modeling in ON30, but what did he pick for a prototype? He picked Sandy River and Rangeley Lakes, which was a 2-foot gauge railroad. And Bachman came out with those cool little fornies, both inside and outside frame ones that were just dead ringers. And so, boy, with that, as I know a number of guys are doing, down East Coast, Maine 2-foot stuff in ON30. It's just neat modeling. So, yeah. So you get to compress the rolling stock is small and everything else. Structures are still as big as ever, coordinate scale.
Right.
So you don't gain anything there. This is one of my projects. I thought I'd throw this in just to show a little bit about what brass work was. This project got started by a good friend of mine who passed away over a decade ago, Dick Lucas. He was instrumental in helping get the framework up for my current layout. And he was just a really good brass builder. One of the narrow gauge conventions in Denver is he went down to Caboose Hobby, and he ended up buying a Sunset Models number 268 C16. Then he bought that, and he says, I think I can turn this into the number 223. So he tore it all apart, and we've got it, started putting it all back together as a 223, working from just a set of marvelous photos from Jack Thode, who was an official on the D&RGW. That even though he was in upper management and knew the narrow gauge had to go because it was financially not viable, he was a narrow gauge fan. And so he took all the photos he possibly could. So out of this great collection is Dick was building this engine. And so when he passed away, I inherited the project, and I'm just about done with it. With any kind of luck, by the end of the year, it'll have DCC paint on it and be running on the railroad if I live that long. So we'll see how that goes.
Well, you have to, because you have to run the train on the layout.
That's right. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Always have to have something to keep you alive.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah.
You can't die till your
Yeah.
projects are all
Yeah,
finished.
yeah. I don't know what it is about the
That's the
Canadians.
rules.
Yeah, absolutely. But the Canadians, they got a bunch of real good modelers up there. I mean, this period. This is Dave Woodhead. He's a professional musician. So his availability is subject to gigs, who's what symphony he's been asked to play with, whether somebody's in town that needs one of his multi-talented instruments. So he has done a lot of really neat things here, and including he tends to collect things from other people that move in and out of the hobby. So this scene, the depot on the left is built by Trevor Marshall. So Trevor Marshall, if you remember, he's written a lot of stuff in Craftsman over the years, both on the standard gauge, narrow gauge, in and out and things, and whatever muse he has at the time. But yeah, David just got an eye for scene composition and photography. That's kind of neat. This is another picture of the same thing, just looking across junk piles. And Bob Brown would call
Clutter.
the scene posh
I
clutter.
love the clutter.
Why?
Yep.
Because the clutter is not cheap.
Yeah.
When you start
Yeah.
buying it, that's expensive clutter out there, but it just looks so cool.
Well, it really adds to the realism having that much stuff. Because
Yeah.
if you look at any place like this in real life,
Yeah, it's
there's junk everywhere. Well,
Yeah,
I'm going to
yeah.
call it junk.
Yeah,
I realize, yeah. But that's,
it's something too valuable to throw away at the time. Yeah.
yeah.
So that's it. And another picture of David's. This is look under there, and what's that tender with the spoke wheels on it? That's actually the rear end of a Mason bogie. Yeah, David decided he likes Mason, so his motive power is really interesting and really eclectic because Dave just likes it like that. So again,
Right.
This is your hobby, do what you want, which is why his railroad, the Maddox in North Hastings, is fictional. And scratch built combine behind it there, built prototype after the prototype Washington and Wayne's
What a great scene.
Washington things. Yeah, this is a little close to home. This is SoCal with my good friend Mike Musel on the Monterey Bay Redwood Company in the SoCal Creek narrow gauge. So this is a picture that Guy Cantwell took using photo stacking techniques on this. It gives you the depth of field. But yeah, Mike is he's a modeling perfectionist. As I like to say, he's the only guy I know that has precision laid bad track work. The track work looks horrible, like a logging line or whatever it is there. Nothing derails. It just all goes over. It's got everything tuned to do that.
I tend to see Mike and Guy both at the West Side reunion every year.
Yeah.
I love that hillside, the
Yeah.
way the ivy, et cetera, is growing to the side of it.
Yep. So we're after Mike to quit. He's got too many irons in the fire. We're telling him, focus, Mike, focus. We want to see more of this railroad get done.
Right.
Really, it's just gorgeous.
Yeah, so that's it. So what these are, onto the critter sort of thing. Fran Foley, who's again local here, he decided he likes critters. He does he primarily ON3, sometimes large scale stuff, but it's strange things that he does. So he found this picture over here of Hercules Power Plant number 17. This is the only locomotive they had for switching things around in the powder plant. They manufactured gunpowder and things like that. And so that was it. So out of that one picture on the left is he ended up doing the 3D design and 3D printing and everything for the model that's on the right
Uh-huh.
on that. And so usually if Fran was doing this is on the, I don't know which group is on, he'll put out a note, and if anybody wants one, he's willing to do, the 3D printing for them for a fee and whatever
Sure.
it is, and they can get the stuff. And then,
Print extras.
and this is what you got. So these are the parts that go into building up that little beast.
Yeah, I run.
And you've run that?
I run into Fran
Fran,
all the
oh, yeah,
time. He was
yeah.
at O-Scale West,
Yeah.
and he was actually just at the rail fair at
Yeah.
Ardenwood
Wood, yep.
because he's with the CCC.
CC, yeah.
But when I saw him at O-Scale West, he had, it might have been, I don't remember now, but it was some critter like this. But I think he has a lot of
He's
them.
got
So
a lot of them, yeah.
I don't know. I don't think it was this one.
Yeah, so
But,
we've
yeah.
shown a lot of Fran stuff over the years on Off the Beaten Track pre-shows on that. But that was,
His stuff would always be interesting to see.
yeah, it is. And then to talk to him about how he does it. So that's basically a Bachmann power plant down below that he modified and adapted and did the 3D printing for the side frames and everything else to get it to come out like the prototype. Okay, this is
Oh, I was wondering if we were going to get some of Bob's.
well, I only had time to grab one of Bob's, and this is just typical. I mean, if you've ever were up to the west side property before it got completely mangled up there, this is what the oil facility, water, and that the sand house looked like up there. And I mean, this is just dead nuts on. And Bob's, of course, hand laid all his tracks here. Everything is it. It's just he's just a marvelous modeler. And yeah, his scratch built locomotives are even better. I mean, they're large scale shays, and they've got every union and valve on it. And he makes all of those things.
We need to brag on Bob for a second here, because Bob's one of these guys that he thinks people don't want to see his stuff, Dave. He says nobody cares about this. So I gotta tell him, because I don't know if I've ever had Bob on the podcast, but I've had his layout in the podcast.
Yeah.
Because
you did. Yeah.
Right. Ever since I've known Bob 5 or 6 years ago, he's always super nice and says, hey, if you ever, want to come over, bring someone over to see my railroad, feel free, just give me a call. And if we'll set up a time. And he's made good on that promise many times now. And he has, just for the viewers, I know you know this, Dave. I don't know if you know this, Murph, but so Bob lives actually not that far from here. And he has a purpose-built room that's probably almost as big as half the size of my house at least. And inside this room is this. It's a FN3 representation of the West Side. And it is just jaw-dropping. I mean, it has an open, ceiling, I guess. So it's not like this, right? Where you have the sheetrock and all that. It's open. So his trees are, 6 or 8 feet tall.
Yes,
and I mean, they're still compressed, I think, a bit. But
he's also got the
trestle
that is floored up above eye level. It's a West Side reproduction.
It's ridiculous. And you see this stuff. We should go there sometime. Maybe in between lunch and the Talking Trains show, so that when we come back to Talking Trains, all you'll do is talk about what Bob did, because it's just amazing. When you walk in and you're just like, whoa! And then the more you look, the more level of detail. Oh, it's ridiculous. And he's scratch built shays that look better than, which is no surprise, than stuff you buy commercially.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
it's amazing. Yeah. Sorry, I had to brag on Bob because it's just something to behold.
Yeah, he and another gentleman named Bob Gray were guys that really pushed this. Oh, and there's another guy named Robert Teets that really pushes this fine scale modeling stuff in the large scales. It's just absolutely incredible. The funny thing about Bob is he's not interested in operation. Strangely enough, he's part of the operating group, and he'll come over and he'll put up with operating, with the rest of us guys, because of the social aspects and things of this sort. See what's going on. Once a year, we have a meet at his house, and once a year, trains get run, and I run them at Bob's house because I like operating. Bob just, I just have no interest. I watch it go around once, and that's enough. And so, he's all dead rail and everything else. So it's but the modeling is just spectacular. He's had photographs on covers of gazettes and in gazettes that you don't know that it's not the real thing. It looks so good. It's just the rest, the who's is just.
I gotta tell you a funny story. So usually you go somewhere and you see on a layout, you see a piece of equipment, right? Oh, I've seen that.
Yep.
I've seen that when I was out at, Name the Railroad, right? Well, on Bob's layout, he has this little critter. It's a little yellow thing, right? You know the one I'm talking about.
I do.
I went to the Nevada County narrow gauge for the first time ever last year, and I saw that, and I said, "Hey, that's Bob's critter." But I saw it in real life. It was like the opposite, right?
Yeah.
And it looks. I thought his critter on his layout looks more realistic than the real one.
Yeah.
So Bob's an amazing modeler, and he's a builder. You can tell he is a builder, and his layout is just. Any excuse I get, that's what I'm saying, Murph, you got to see it. any excuse I get to see Bob's layout, I want to go back and see it
Yeah.
again, because I'm just floored every time I see it. It's like, oh wow. And then on that one wall, he has all the motive power, right? And he has a Garrett.
Yeah.
But that's not something you see very often.
No. Yeah, he's also got that 1 inch, not 1 inch scale. I forget. It's whatever 4 feet and 8.5 inches on LGB track turns out to be. He's got that SP cab forward. It's just
right. And who has that?
Yeah. And that even though he's a West Side fan, he's got K36s, K37s. He just likes the big stuff.
Right.
Yep.
But what he chooses to model is West Side for the most part.
Even looking at this picture here, look at the wall, the little rock wall to the right side of the picture.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he placed that, piece by piece.
He would have.
It's pretty amazing. So anyway, sorry, I had to brag on Bob because his modeling is just amazing. I really wish I could get him to let me shoot his layout, because it is so inspirational, and people would just be like, this is a model. Get a GoPro down near the track and take pictures of it like low, and you'd never know. Sorry, Dave, I didn't mean to sidetrack you there.
The other thing that's fun is when I get to annually run over at his house, because all his stuff is heavy. It's all got metal wheels. He's got rail gaps. So you're listening to this clickety-clack, clickety-clack. I mean, it's the real deal. There's a string of log cars with logs on them rolls by. It's fantastic. So this is as far as the slides and things that I brought. This was kind of it. And this is another Jim Holmes photo. And I thought this would probably be a good way to at least close out the photo segment. And we can see, but it's, I'm just a narrow gauge enthusiast, and have been.
You think?
But I will admit is standard gauge is okay too. I mean, at one of the layout design OPSIG weekends once, I was on a panel, and somebody basically said, if you weren't doing narrow gauge, Dave, what would you be doing? I said, I'd be doing SP standard gauge in the steam era. I mean, that was it. So my current project happens to be an SP C30-1 wood caboose in quarter-inch scale. So that's a little change of venue, but I'm having a lot of fun with that. I just like building stuff, and I like operating. So I'm kind of a rare bird that thinks it's fun doing both. Most of the hobby is kind of in one camp or the other. It seems like there's guys that I don't care about building, but I sure like operating.
Right.
And you got the other camp that running trains. I don't want to do that. I want to build stuff. It's just there's something for everybody in this hobby.
That's just it. Yeah, I've always been amazed at the people with these fantastic layouts, and it's like, why would I want to do that? I'm enjoying myself.
Right.
Well, Bob Brown, who let's see, did I talk about Bob Brown? I'm getting old. I forgot already.
I don't remember hearing about Bob Brown yet, and I figured he'd come up at some point.
Well, because there should have been a slide in there with Bob Brown. I wonder if we went over it.
Don't remember seeing a slide with Bob Brown.
Oh man, that's not good. So,
we need to talk about Bob Brown, because he's like one of the original fine scale guys, right?
Yeah. So I've had. I'm going to say I've been involved in the destruction of too many really fine railroads, and I've been involved in the destruction of Bob's. So Bob was a railway enthusiast. He started out in standard gauge on that, and he was just enamored with trying to do fine scale, back before fine scale was a thing on that. And to that end, he decided that he was going to start a newsletter among fine scale enthusiasts so they could keep in touch and hopefully build the whole kind of movement so manufacturers would see it's big enough to start making the supplies they needed. So he had an ulterior motive. So the first, they were run off on Bob was a school teacher. So he used he cut stencils and used the mimeograph machine at school to run off the first bunch of issues of Fine Line. And it came out, periodically in a way I had a chance to do it. And that eventually morphed into a more professional publication called Fine Lines with, better. But now we could do photography. We could have photos in them, whereas when you're running a mimeograph machine, you don't have photos and things of this sort on that. And then at one point, it got to there was a competing publication called Slim Gauge News out of Colorado. And those guys were running on a shoestring. Bob was running on a shoestring. And, they eyed each other as a competition. Well, it turns out the guys in Colorado sort of called Uncle first and said, yeah, we can't make it. We got to throw in. So Bob, he and his wife, Irene, flew out there and arranged a deal and said, suppose we merge the two publications. And we'll call it the Narrow Gauge and Short Line Gazette. And we'll be able to cover this stuff, and we'll focus on fine scale, short lines, narrow gauges, and things like that. So that was it. And that ended up being first published, printed out, actually in Felton.
Really?
By Charlie Gibbons. Charlie Gibbons at that time was running what was called Big Trees Press on that as one of his things, and was part of the, on that. Gordon Cannon was on the editorial staff. If people know of Cannon and Company, who build detail parts for diesels,
Right.
stuff like that. Yep. So they got that going, and Bob was at one point he decided standard gauge was it, but he really got bitten with a narrow gauge bug, and he would get up to the west side when it was still a west side, take black and white pictures of all that stuff, of all kinds of other mining things around here, and so he said, I really like this stuff. So he kind of gave up on the standard gauge and started narrow gauge. And his first he built some little bitty dioramas just to show, to see what could be done. Then he built a large diorama called the Tuolumne Forks. And the Tuolumne Forks was sort of a game changer, I think, in the hobby. There were several people that were game changers as far as narrow gauge go. Bob was one of them. He was the guy that kept it going. The other guys that really had an influence on generating excitement around narrow gauge modeling was, believe it or not, Malcolm Furlow. He published in Model Railroad his original Rio Chama Western Railroad, and then the series of articles that Model Railroad commissioned me to do on building the San Juan Central.
Right.
And then John Olson, who was an HON3 modeler building something called the Mescal lines. Well, these two guys were both Disney Imagineers and kind of spacey, and they built fantastic stuff. I mean, they were works of art. In real life, would they have stood up? Nope. They were not structural engineers. They would have fallen down in a minute. So there were a whole lot of things wrong with what they were doing, but it was so cool. People just loved it. And so that was it. And Bob kept doing that, and he's featured both of those guys in that, and it's kind of kept things together. So Bob also liked Maine 2-footers, and he decided he built two Maine foot dioramas. One of them was of Phillips, and the other was of Wiscasset. Wiscasset was probably the most widely known one because it traveled the shows. And for that one, he ended up, he needed some ON2 fornies. So he had to scratch build these things. Mm-hmm. And he built two of them. One of them he built, and it didn't run for Tweed. I mean, he was just really disappointed in that. And so he said, well, I got to do this again. So he built another one, and that one actually ran. So he's been through that twice on that. But the rolling stock and everything was fine. They said that went to shows. The Wiscasset layout, he ended up selling to a hobby shop that used to be in San Jose called Miniatures and Things. And they had a back room that you could buy entrance to, or this layout was in there. Another big HO scale D&RGW standard gauge layout was being built. But mostly what it was dollhouse miniatures built by people that really knew how to do. I mean, the modeling was fantastic.
Right.
Of course, they're out of business. They used to be on Bascom Avenue, and they went out. Then Bob built another 2-foot gauge scene of Phillips, which is another thing. That wasn't, turns out all of them ended up being written up at Model Railroader at some time or another, and several other magazines. And then when Bob decided, well, he needed to expand, and that's when he put an addition on the house up in Los Altos. So this addition, it went out the back, and it added a second story over the addition on the back. And the upstairs is to be the Tuolumne Forks Railroad. So this was going to be his big railroad. And And I remember when he was working on it, he says, Dave, I'm learning a few things. There's a difference between building a big model railroad and building dioramas. I said, yeah, there is. He says, if you're going to get the big model railroad, you just can't spend the time and detail on it. Turns out Bob, of course, proved himself wrong, because as John has seen, is that railroad is so detailed and so many mini scenes and so much clutter and so many weeds and vegetation. It was just, overwhelming. It was just fantastic. So at any rate, that was it. Bob also in that same room, he'd get something finished and he had no problem tearing it up and building something else in its place. So I don't know how many different times scenes had changed.
How many iterations?
And then the other thing is he discovered, the stairwell coming upstairs, that's wasted space. If I could cantilever things, I could build another darn railroad over there. So he had a railroad that was cantilevered over the staircase coming upstairs that wrapped around in a little corner alcove office. And there he built large scale stuff, a little mining tramway and the Hulk Hill mine and other things. It was pretty cool. Then at one point he said, well, he had the Tuolumne Forks saved, in his workshop, which was in the main layout room, kind of up over it. He said, well, if I move this down here, there was a landing space partway up the stairs that didn't have anything on it. He says, I'll move the Tuolumne Forks down there to collect dust, and then I'll build a new railroad up here, which he did. And he got enamored with the Civil War layout, and he decided, well, okay, been there, done that. That came out. Then for some reason he got interested in the powder works that kind of used to be in the San Lorenzo Valley down here.
Right, yeah.
So he said, I want to build that. Jim Vale had built one for his railroad. Paul Scholes up in the Northwest had built one on his railroad. And so Bob decided he was going to build one. So he did. So he built that using ON30. And he had a town and all the beehive ovens.
Right,
and, it was for drying the coke. So that was it. So, taking all that. And turns out the CCC guys ran off with most of the stuff out of the coke ovens railroad, which is cool. We'll see how they put that together and work it into their modules.
They're planning to work it in. So that's stuff that will live on, right?
Yeah, I know
Dave
Gill spent quite a bit of time up there with a Sawzall pulling out stuff that they were running off with. And,
they had mentioned that. I was talking to Jay Shellen, who also is part of that group here at Ardenwood a couple weeks ago, and he was telling me about what they got off of Bob's Railroad. So it'll be interesting to see. Also, they had another friend, Joe, whose last name escapes me now, but we did a layout tour of his portion of the CCC layout that was down in Morgan Hill, and it was really, really good modeling. Joe, it's right on the edge of my brain.
I saw your video.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I should mention that too, that you can see the layout tour that we shot. You were there, right? When we shot with Bob Brown, weren't you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that we shot of Bob Brown's layout. Thanks to this guy for the introduction to Bob Brown. That's one that's, I think people should watch because, as you were saying, Bob was pretty instrumental in this whole fine scale modeling movement. And, that kind of brings me to this idea that I've always had really since I started getting, expanding my horizons in the hobby and covering more different stuff and different layouts. And it seems to me, and I think we've had this conversation in the past, it seems to me like narrow gauge modelers tend to be the most detailed, or they go to more lengths to get something more detailed or more realistic. And I've never quite figured out why that is. My theory has been, or my hypothesis, I should say, has been something along the lines of, well, they have to scratch build a lot of stuff because a lot of stuff you can't just buy. Now, I don't know how true that is because you can buy structures and everything in all those scales, right? Because ON30 or ON3 is just O scale. It's 1 to 48. So you can buy that stuff. But is it because they're modeling obscure places maybe that maybe the stuff isn't available as kits? Like if you wanted to do a West Side, that's probably a bad example because it might be available, but a West Side structure of some sort, you'd have to research it and build it yourself, right? I mean,
that's basically it. And what you had there were either you did your own research or you bought a Russ Simpson plan pack, which a lot of people have done, and then build the structures from there. Or now there's another gentleman that's an architect down in Southern California. He's the guy that's cleaned up the last 2 PCR contests, taking away all the top hardware.
Uh-huh.
It just does.
If you said his name, I'd remember it.
Tidball.
Tidball, that's right. Yeah.
Larry Tidball.
Larry
right.
Tidball. Yeah, he cleans up at Westside. Westside.
Yeah,
Reunion,
he
too.
does that. Yeah. He's
Very
just
good
fantastic.
modeler.
Yeah, so he says, I've been working on, from photographs and everything else, being an architect, of drawing the right plans for all this West Side stuff. He says, Russ did the bill as originally built, but that's not what people remember from the 50s. He says, my plans are 15 sheets, and I've got the 1950s bill, when everybody was up there rail fanning and everything else on that. And he came up to Bob's last week before last, when we were up there dismantling things, and because he wanted to pick up some pieces of Bob.
Mm-hmm.
Then that was kind of, it was pretty cool to run into him. And I ran into people coming down from the rim. We had the last big open house was on the 13th, and that worked really well. We had a lot of stuff go out. There were a lot of people carrying out structures, carrying out rolling stock, stuff of this sort. Some kits. Still got a lot of kits left, but we're done with the open houses at this point because of the way the estate has to be handled. So it was pretty neat. But Bob, like I said, if he was the guy that kept things going between conventions, he kind of knit the community into a narrow gauge community, and he was the guy that basically said, "This is a fellowship of fine modelers," and that was his hallmark. This model railroading stuff is fun, and we're doing a fellowship of fine modelers.
That's really
which is what he did. And his big trip every year was to get to the narrow gauge convention until he was at the point where he couldn't travel.
Right.
On that. He and Charlie Getz. So Charlie Getz started his column in the Narrow Gauge Gazette with the first issue of the Narrow Gauge Shortline Gazette. He only missed one issue. Oh. That's the one that's the most sought after. The one that Charlie didn't have the column in. No, it was. No, Charlie's he's a great guy who's done that. And so he's I think he's got one more column to appear in the Gazette, but he said when Bob goes out, I go out. But he's going to still keep writing kit reviews. Why? Because Charlie likes building kits.
Right.
he's got kits up the wazoo, structure kits in particular. So that'll be fun. But yeah, I knew Bob. Well, I met him in 1975. So we'd go along. I'd go up there and just to visit him. He was just He was really he was an amazing. He and his wife were just really well read. Their house was, the dining room had bookshelves in it. The living room had bookshelves in it. The hallway had bookshelves, floor to ceiling bookshelves in it, with every imaginable book on it. They could carry on a conversation on just about any topic.
Yeah,
and he was a delight to visit.
Yeah, I remember
just an excellent modeler.
I remember having been there a few times over the past few years since you introduced me to him, and that was one of the things I always thought. Like, there are books everywhere.
Yeah, there are books everywhere.
In every room that I saw. Maybe not in the bathroom, but everywhere else you look, there were books. And I remember we sat with Bob just downstairs from the layout there, looking at I think it was from the books I think he wanted to show me the books that he had produced on that guy's layout.
You're Harry Brunk.
Brunk,
Harry Brunk,
in the layouts in Wyoming now in Cheyenne Depot, and we were sitting there, and I remember as we were sitting there just looking around and seeing like floor to ceiling books, just everywhere you look. So that's interesting. I wonder,
where you were sitting when we filmed part of Bob's, that was down in what was the Narrow Gauge Shortline Gazette offices.
Right. That's sort of the place I'm talking about. Yeah.
And those offices, after Irene died, before Irene had died, is Bob had sold the Gazette to White River Productions. Right. And he just said, I get to stay on as editor, which I really like doing. And he says they've agreed to keep on Sharon Olson, who was the graphics layout person it kind of held everything together on that. And he says, and Irene and I get to argue about editing, and he just says, that just brings me a great joy in life, to be able to go back and forth with his wife on how should this thing read. And yeah, they were fun. I know authors for the Gazette that said they absolutely hated working with Irene because she wasn't a trained person.
Oh,
And they wanted it stated a certain way, and Irene said, no, it ought to read like this. And my articles, as long as I didn't insist on having them write it my way, as long as it wasn't completely incorrect, just had to be close enough. I mean, I was in it to try and help out the magazine. So
how many articles did you do for them?
oh, I don't know. I did a number of plans. I mean, I was in for about a year or two in the 80s. So trips to Colorado, I'd go with a tape measure. And so one of the chores Carla had was holding what's known as the dumb end of the tape, which while I went around and I measured up everything in sight that looked like it wasn't going to be there for much longer. And then I would come back and old school, we're talking pen and ink and vellum and drawing board stuff, draw plans. And Bob would publish these things, and so he would publish those along with black and white photos that would show to the subject, and did that. And then I wrote articles. I wrote an article on the original layout in the garage, and a couple of years ago I wrote an article on the present layout. About a 40-year difference or something between the two.
Right.
But that's it. Meanwhile, I've written on other subjects on how to build things and tools and for building models and stuff like that. And then the most recent has been writing a 3-part series on building the Chalmer Roundhouse.
Oh, okay.
Is why I think it was in the early 20s.
Right.
Everybody knows what it is now, but what was it back then? So all that research came from ICC archives back in Washington, D.C.
Uh-huh.
And people would look this stuff up and they would scan it and post it. And I spent years, scavenging all this stuff up.
Right.
And I've got a spreadsheet that just is awful as far as dates and who's this and when they did that, expenditures for authorization to install this, to rip this out, to make that change. It was, for me, the historical fund. That's why I'm saying is that the history from this stuff, whether it's standard gauge, narrow gauge, doesn't make any difference. If you get into the history, it is so fascinating. You just get head over heels. And I think in the narrow gauge sense that's why you have people go nuts over trying to get this thing exactly right, because they've done so much darn research on it that that's what I'm going to build. No question about it. And so
cool.
Whereas over the years, I've gotten less and less picky. I used to be a lot pickier when I was younger, and I thought I knew everything. Now that I'm not even close is good enough is good enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm more. And you talked about people. I regret now I didn't take more pictures of people on that, doing things, and friends and people that are gone. And anyhow, for the last bunch of conventions, when I was still well enough to get to them, long ago, the vendors room was always really cool, and I always liked wandering around and talking to vendors and things. But I really wasn't looking for anything because I'd accumulated everything I was ever going to need from the darn railroad.
Right.
And so why I would go to a convention, it was to see friends.
Right.
Yeah, go out to dinner with them, tour layouts, sit in the bar, have a couple of tall ones, tell lies. I mean, that was what the convention was for.
Yeah, I find it a lot more fun than the train show is kind of nice to go to just to see what's new coming out. Yep. But I rarely go to actually buy anything. I can get anything I want here if I need it. And really, you have to have a little bit of discipline with your own railroad, or you can just swamp it out. So, yeah. My discipline came when I decided I was going to do the D&RGW narrow gauge. And I was going to focus on the 4th Division. And I was going to focus on this particular time period. And that was, so that all of a sudden, all these neat kits that came out on the market, nope, doesn't fit, can't use it. It's nice to see, but
it is, right. The other thing is that my timing was just impeccably bad all the time. The kit that I needed had just gone out of production, wasn't available anywhere. I hadn't showed up on eBay or whatever, so I had to scratch build it. So most everything on the layout is scratch built, from research and plans and things of this sort, which turns out was what I really wanted to do in the hobby anyway.
Right.
So it worked out really well that way. And you said, well, there's lots of kits now. There's lots of kits if you like the Rio Grande Southern. A gentleman named Mike McCarville is modeling the Rio Grande Southern and HON3, and he decided, yeah, he was going to do this, and as long as he was doing CAD drawings and laser cutting things, he might as well turn that into a business.
Yep.
So people in that, and also SM3 and a couple of the ON3 guys, if you like our RGS stuff, Mike's probably got you covered for structures. Rio Grande, those are harder to come by.
I remember though back in the 70s when I was first into the hobby and was everything was East Coast wharf scenes.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's still a lot of East Coast wharf scenes.
Yeah.
And it's just, so Tim Waris at Fast Tracks, one of the things he was building was that Baltimore, Ohio ferry.
The Bronx Terminal.
Yes, the Bronx Terminal.
Yeah.
That just, I can see why marine stuff is fascinating to people. It just is.
Yeah.
Just San Francisco for that matter.
The track work in that thing was just fascinating.
Yeah.
And when you understand, it's like you had this much area to do all of this in.
Yeah. Circular warehouse, all that stuff, spotting boxcars around. Both operationally and whatever it is. And then having to get the cars lined up and in and out for the ferry because there wasn't an interchange with anything else there. It was all via ferry.
Right.
Yeah, it was just all that stuff is just fascinating. So I just happened to fall off on the narrow gauge end of things and say that's a pretty good way to live and pretty good way for me to model, and that turned out to be true.
I hadn't really thought about that, but I can see how choosing a narrow gauge topic for your layout could easily focus you, whereas if you're just doing a standard gauge, whatever, every cool thing that comes out, you're like, and HO scale, every cool thing that comes out, you might just be like, oh, I want that on my layout.
You can do that, but I think it's important to figure out what you want to build anyway. No matter what gauge, what scale, whatever you're doing, you can go crazy. There are plenty of collectors in the hobby.
Oh yeah.
But if you actually say, well, I want to build this, it starts to limit what you get to, what you should be buying. Then the question is whether you have the discipline.
Yeah.
Right.
So take Tony Thompson, for example, who's Mr. SP, between him and Rain Fade.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a lot.
So Tony's railroad is fascinating because he selected a time period and a theme, and it's completely fictional, but it's so SP, you're on the SP if you're up at his railroad.
Yes.
And he's forced the time period. He's done everything else, and if it's new and shiny on the market, but it doesn't fit what he's doing, he doesn't buy it. I mean, it's just he's really, really disciplined. Oh, John Signer was the other guy.
Okay.
Right. And he's pretty much the same way with what he's done on his stuff. So there's so there's fanatics and all parts of the hobby on that you use a time period or a theme to focus their efforts so they don't get waylaid by all the really cool stuff that's being made.
And of course, at the end of the day, if you're having fun, you're doing it right. So it doesn't really matter. But I often think that though. I've learned, it's funny, honestly, I don't know, or kind of figure I will probably never build a layout, but I have learned so much from so many people that if I were to ever build a layout, it would be a really good project because I've learned so many tricks from people, like focusing on a layout, on an era and a region or whatever, so that you don't get tempted by every new shiny thing that comes out. Because I think a lot of people lack focus, and that's one way to get it is by narrowing in on a very specific thing. And actually, thinking about that, I could see how, and even if you're doing a freelance thing, you can still focus because it's your story and you can make it whatever you want it to be. So it's an interesting topic to think about. We still have some time for questions if people have questions. I haven't seen a lot of questions popping up on the. So, I mean,
I've got thousands of slides. I should have included a few more.
Yeah, we could have had a really long presentation today.
Yeah, we could have. Yeah,
We'd be here next week
Yeah.
still talking about narrow gauge.
that's
So,
right. Yeah,
but it's an interesting topic, I think, because I agree with you, Dave, that a lot of the settings where narrow gauge was employed in real life
yeah, which is,
are just very interesting.
Yeah.
You know, because you may not agree with clear cut logging, you
Yeah.
know, or strip mining or
yeah.
you know, stuff that's
Yeah.
not hazardous but destructive to
Well, yeah,
the environment. But
yeah, the narrow,
they did it though,
Yeah.
right? And the processes by which they extracted these resources are
It-
pretty interesting. You know,
yeah, they
Well,
were.
a lot of that was the stuff that's got us to the point where we have the luxury of realizing that clear cutting
Yeah,
and
yeah,
strip
right,
mining isn't a good thing.
Yeah.
yeah. But one of the most interesting things I've often thought, right, is especially with logging railroads, right, where, and a lot of people don't realize that logging railroads would lay the track in,
Oh, yeah.
work and bring in their town on the rails.
Yeah.
You know, all the housing and the cookhouse and everything on the rails, set up a camp, finish cutting whatever
Yeah.
was there, and then pick it all up and take
pull
the
up
tracks
rails.
with them,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And go
Yeah,
move it to someplace else. And
Yeah, if you look at maps of the west side,
yes,
that's all it is all of these
yes,
tendrils going into the mountains there. And this is abandoned, this is abandoned, we pushed up here, this is abandoned. I mean, it's just fascinating.
what's interesting
Well,
about those
Santa
maps?
Cruz Trains
Oh,
on
yeah.
Facebook
Yeah,
had a recent article on the railroads north of Boulder Creek,
Creek,
which
yeah.
of course is really interesting to me.
yeah, yeah,
And yeah, I'm going along on the map saying,
Yeah.
oh, it stopped here, it stopped here, it
yeah,
stopped,
yeah,
goes up to the end of Kings Creek.
yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay, because I'm
Yeah.
proto
I'm
freelancing
saying,
that
yeah,
as a
yeah,
UP route
okay,
now.
yeah.
And it's like, oh, that's the way we'd go. But still,
Yeah.
and there are remnants of railroads in my
Yeah,
area.
yeah.
I have a nice piece of light rail going up my hill.
That's
So-
funny.
So Mike Musel's, his house and his railroad is located on what used to be the dry yard for the Monterey Bay Redwood Lumber Company, which was they planned for a narrow gauge logging railroad, but they didn't do it. They got co-opted by the White Trunk Company and became a truck logging outfit.
Okay.
So Mike just said, well, what if they'd done the railroad? And
Right.
so that's what his model railroad is based on
Yeah.
that. So his the mock-ups of his mills and everything else, it's going to be the Monterey Bay Redwood Lumber Company stuff, as far as all of that goes. The difference is not a whole lot of log trucks. Well, maybe a couple of log trucks from Joe.
Oh, right. Yeah,
Joe
yeah, yeah.
Piazza, because they're so damn nice.
They really are.
Yeah. But otherwise, it's geared locomotives, steam grades, and
Yeah.
log cars and stuff. So he's doing that. His is a fun railroad to operate on. I don't operate much. I dispatch a lot
Yeah.
because everybody else takes two step back, when it comes out, and I'm not that fast, so I get stuck. But
I'd really like to see Mike's sometime.
Yeah.
I see him all the time, like I said,
Yeah.
at least once a year
Yeah,
at the
yeah,
west
yeah.
side. And every time I'm like, oh, I'd like to see your. Oh, it's not done. It's not done. It's
Oh,
never done.
it's
So
not done.
Yeah.
Yeah. We keep telling him, Mike, you got to focus. He says, well, I got to do this. Well, first thing you got to do is get back to your scenery because you've got 10,000 trees that are taking up your workshop, so you can't do
anything else.
And those are all ready to plant. Get some more scenery.
Yeah. I have to start figuring out how I'm going to make actual redwoods
Oh,
because I want them to be tall
Yeah.
appropriately. So, and so I when I still had trees in my backyard, I saved redwood branches
yeah,
that
yeah.
fell and found the ones that were relatively straight
Straight,
and cut them to a certain length. And then I'm going to be doing the whole florist wire and flocking
Yeah,
and all
yeah.
that kind of stuff trick. So
They have
that's-
some pretty decent redwoods at SBHRS. I don't know if you've ever seen those. You ever seen them
Yeah.
on the layout? As
No,
you're
I
entering
haven't.
the layout room, there's a little
on the right.
logging section
Yeah.
on the right.
Oh,
And their redwoods
okay.
look pretty. They look pretty
Yeah,
good, don't
yeah,
they?
I think so.
No, we got to get you to see Bob's.
yeah.
Yeah.
Bob Polly's,
Yeah.
One of the things I was going to say about you mentioned the maps, right, of the west
Yeah.
side, and you see these maps and you see all the little spines and,
Yeah.
and places, And someone who doesn't know would look at that and go, "Oh wow, they really went a lot of places." And you have to realize that they didn't. They moved them, and so they were still on the map, but they were gone.
Yeah, they were going there one at a time. Yeah, pretty much.
Or a couple at a time, right, to various log camps. But one interesting railroad that I learned about more recently is the Madera Sugar Pine Company, which had everything. I mean, they had a super long flume that went from wherever their camp was all the way down to Madera in the valley. And something that I found that was just fascinating was that people would use it as a mode of transportation, right? They would ride the flume all the way down to town and then get a ride on a wagon or a horse or something all back to where they came from.
Yeah, the whole trick about those flumes and things is building them such that it would carry the log, but not at such a speed that you ended up with nothing but kindling at the end of the flume. Because you didn't want a high-speed impact busting up all this high-value timber.
I was wondering about the slide where you said, well, they're switching on the fly with this loaded log car going. I'm like,
okay, what do we have here?
I hope somebody's ready to catch it.
Well, what you couldn't see was on the other end there would have been a guy winding down the brakes on that to bring it to a gentle stop so they could get it propped up. I've got a bunch of Jim's slides that he took on his trips up to the west side on that. They're just fun to look at, and it's just incredible what these guys in real life did. It was fun. Well, it wasn't fun.
It was dangerous.
I was going to say, I don't think FRA would really be agreeing with a lot of this stuff.
Or OSHA, right? There's one picture, and I don't know where it's from. You probably know, Dave, but it's a locomotive hanging off a wire that's being carried across this chasm, like this canyon. And I think there's even a guy on it. And I'm looking at this picture going, who would be crazy enough to ride that thing across this canyon on a wire?
That'd be the Diamond and Caldor.
Where's that from?
They were up north out of Humboldt.
Okay.
In Humboldt Bay. And
so you know the picture I'm talking about, right?
I do, yeah. And there were actually 2 or 3 operations in California that had aerial tramways that would move empty cars up to the camps, loaded cars coming down on this aerial tramway, and then at the end assembled and then taken on back down. So you had a railroad at each end of the thing. And to get your locomotives up there, what'd they do? Well, they built tramway, all that stuff, ran the locomotive onto this thing, zipped it across the canyon to the other side.
The picture's terrifying.
They are, but the funny thing is, you'd look at that, and then you would have the annual family campers outing or whatever it is, and here you got people just hanging all over this stuff, swinging on these little wire ropes, across the canyon to go up to the camp or whatever. Just going, man, those were tough people.
The beginnings of the hold my beer moments.
How dangerous can we make this?
Exactly.
But I mean, that's the thing, though, too. Like,
these guys didn't do that to seek thrills. They did this stuff for a living.
Well, and I guess they were paid, right, by someone who wanted those resources taken out of the area. And the interesting thing to me is, I've heard stories, right, that you would know who the railroaders were because they were missing fingers, right? So
but that was Lincoln pin couplers and other kinds of things there.
Anything that's dangerous, hazardous to your health or life or limbs, as they call it.
There was a story on the RGS that, so when they brought the gooses on, and when they ran those and then decided, well, maybe we can attract tourists by taking the freight bodies and converting them into open windows on the side and carry passengers and do that. Of course, what do you do? Well, you have railroaders on that, and a lot of them have been with the Rio Grande Southern for a long time. And so they've been involved in accidents and things of this sort. And so one of them was a brakeman, and of course he was missing a forefinger that had been smashed off, so he had a thumb and three remaining fingers or whatever it is. And I guess at one time on one of the trips, the story goes, is the tourist asked him, well, what happened to your finger? And he turned around and said, ma'am, I wore it out pointing out scenery to tourists. just give you an idea. Railroaders have stories and a sense of humor. For the most part. It's just great.
Well, I'm not seeing a lot of questions coming in, so your presentation must have been very thorough.
No, it was actually boring.
Oh, it was boring.
That was the hard part.
Man, that was a
people-
bunch of great work
Oh, for
with
sure.
all those modelers. That's just so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well-
I should have brought a lot more.
One of the things, well, maybe we'll do a part 2 sometime,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Yeah,
I mean,
what you didn't see.
well, you know, we have op sessions as an excuse to hang out. We
Yeah,
also have
yeah.
Talking Trains, the show, as an excuse to hang out.
Yeah,
Not just with everybody
Yeah.
who you know tunes in or whatever you call it when you're watching stuff
Yeah.
Yeah.
on YouTube, but we got to hang out together today too.
I
So-
got to compliment you on your title slide, John.
The title
Yeah.
slide? What you mean the background?
Yeah, the background slide there. Yeah,
Isn't that a nice picture?
it is.
Yeah. It's
That was,
almost-
that was a great trip.
yeah. Well, I guess that's it. Unless you have something else to talk about, I'm all talked out.
Nope.
Imagine that.
I'm good.
Yeah.
Nope.
Imagine being all talked out, Dave.
Yep.
Imagine
That's
me
good.
being all talked
Yeah.
out. That's the real thing. Let me see. There's something. Focus on a narrowing topic and very well done. Well, thank
Yeah,
you,
good.
Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
Oh, and Robert Darby says Happy Father's Day. I forgot that's this weekend,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
Happy Father's Day, everybody.
Yeah. Dave mentioned at the beginning the national end scale thing is in Wisconsin.
The N scale convention.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I've often thought that it would be fun to have a segment of the show where people could plug all the events, but
Yeah.
there are so many events. We
Yeah.
would be here all week just talking
Yeah.
about the events, right? So anyway, I think that'll do it for this show. I hope everybody had fun.
Well-
Hope you learned something. Coming out sometime soon. I haven't finished the editing yet, but I shot a video with Dave
Oh,
about
yeah.
fine scale modeling. What is it? And
Awesome.
he talks about some of the, you know, the equipment and the difference between what we call O scale, 2-rail O scale, and real
Yeah,
proto
fine scale, yeah,
48, right?
Yeah.
And the difference between the fine scale truck wheels and all that. So that'll be out sometime in the near future. Look for it. I think I'm going to call it "What is Fine Scale"
Or something.
with Dave Adams.
It'll come out when John runs out of other material to use first.
Yeah,
So
it's at
that's-
the bottom
yeah,
of the list.
It
It's
is.
the last
I
thing
know,
on.
yeah.
Yeah, when everything interesting is done,
Yeah, yeah.
I'll get around to that one.
That'll be another sleeper.
Right. So
Yep.
get your pillows ready. Thank you very much for watching, and thanks to all the chat moderators for keeping us on track, and thanks to you guys for coming. I hope you had fun. I did.
Yep,
I
I
did.
had fun.
Learned something, and like I said before, got to hang out. So everything's good.
Good.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
All right.